It's June 8, Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum continues its operation. My name is Vasil Samakhvalov, and we continue tracking the events in Kakhovka HPP. Our guest today is Dmytro Zaruba, first deputy head of the State Environmental Inspectorate of Ukraine. And the question is, what exactly is the State Environmental Inspectorate is busy with in relation to the catastrophe that falls under the sphere of its responsibility? The State Environmental Inspection now analyzes the data that are incoming from Kherson region, Zaporizhia region, and Dnipropetrovsk region, because the impact of the destruction of the Kakhovka HPP dam does not only affect Kherson region, but all those areas in the upper flow of the Dnipro River. We've sampled the water from Kakhovka water reservoir to understand what was the volume, what amount of fuel was poured into the water after the destruction of the dam. As it was mentioned by the government, the Ministry for Environmental Protection, it's the matter of about 150 tons plus 300 tons more, so it's 450 tons in total. We keep track of this situation. We continue documenting the territories which are flooding, because in future, as the flood subsides, we have to wait until that moment to understand the condition of the environment there, how many animals have died, what will be the negative impact on the soils, and so on and so forth. So it's difficult to give the exact figures now, because the period of collection of information is still pending, so we can calculate the loss and damage. So about the generalized information, it's not only you who calculates the damage, because there are people who calculate economic damage, there is forestry. Where is this information going to be consolidated? So let's put it like this. First of all, the actions, all activities of the local committee for emergency is accumulating all the data. There are units in the central bodies of the government who worked in their areas. We collect data from our area. State Water Agency, State Forestry Agency also collect data in their areas, and they channel all the information to the Ministry for Environmental Protection, and then this information, the final figures, are being submitted to the Office of the President. The criminal case is already opened. The investigations are pending to add all the data to the joint case to enforce reparations from Russian aggressor. There was an initiative by Mr. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, to create a joint commission with members to be included from Ukraine, Russia, and Turkey, and United Nations to investigate this story. Is it good or bad? I cannot comment it from the point of view of State Environmental Inspectorate. It's the international cooperation area. There is Office of the President and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's up to them to identify the necessity for creation of such committee. Well, we understand there is a lot of different types of damage. Many things will be affected by this catastrophe, but as a specialist, as a person, can you identify three main areas, three key areas where will the damage be present to the most extent? Well, first of all is the natural reserves. We've already lost part of it because some rare species which were added to the Red Book, they're in fact destroyed, and whether the nature will recover in the same way, it's still unknown. Another area is the contamination with those petroleum and oil and lubricants that got into the water from the gas stations. Then the then the storage of agricultural products, the fertilizers and other chemicals that can be poured into water, they will impact the environment for decades to come. I have to say, I was just back from Kalinivka. There was a damage of the oil base there, or the fuel base, and with the 6,000 tons spillage, and it still smells there after 1 year. All those tons of fuel were poured into a local lake, and there are still stains of oil on top of that lake on the surface, and so this influence will be persistent for years and years. So let's proceed to the questions from the floor. Valentin Marchuk, Ukrinform, can you please name the methods using which we calculate the losses, and are those methods objective? Are they in accord with the challenges that we're facing, because it's the first case that we're having of this type. Last year there were 7 techniques approved by the Ministry of Environmental Protection, and we used them to calculate and evaluate the losses. Is the contamination of soil, contamination of natural reserves, contamination of water. So we work using those techniques to evaluate the damage and losses, but to calculate it in an objective manner, we have to get finalized data that we will be able to obtain only as the water level subsides, and we can evaluate the situation in a more objective way. More questions? Do you get international partners involved in this process? Maybe there are some agreements for some financial support, equipment support, and stuff like that. Well, talking about the Environmental Inspectorate, we work on our own, and we have sufficient resources to do it on our own, to sample the water and soil. But we will obviously ask for the support of the international organizations, because more than 70 international experts work in the operational headquarters of the Environmental Inspectorate, and we will ask for their advice to evaluate the situation as it exists now. Do you think Ukraine will be able to enforce reparations for ecocide? Do we have all the mechanisms in place both on Ukrainian and international level? Well, it's directly the Ministry of Justice who deals with this issue. They will be responsible for submitting of the case to international institutions. Obviously, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is involved, specialized environmental prosecutor's office, so the mechanism is being worked out on the part of State Environmental Inspectorate. We gather the evidences, we calculate the losses and damage, and we hand over that data to the relevant authorities in charge. So as to the evaluation of the losses, do we have any preliminary details? So what is the first approximate amount of damage? Well, I cannot tell you about some figure because it's dynamically changing, but it will amount to hundreds of billions of hryvnias. In all areas: contamination, soil, waters, loss of biodiversity. Most likely a lot will be evaluated, a lot of damage will be calculated as a damage to the natural reserves. So how many years do we need to overcome the consequences of this catastrophic situation? The head of Ukrohydroenergo mentioned that to restore the Kakhovka HPP, we will need at least 5 years and billions of funds working 24/7. But to recover the environment, we unfortunately have this case of Chernobyl nuclear power plant explosion. So how many years does it take to recover all the ecosystem there? You know, the recovery of ecosystems is a very long process, and what is up to the humans, it will be done, but then it's only a natural cycle which may take decades and even centuries. It was said by the ministry that there are some species of fish that are already eradicated just as a result of the detonation of the dam by the Russians. Maybe there are some calculations, some estimates of what are the species that are about to disappear. It's not up to environmental inspectorate. There are specialized institutions who will analyze this situation, and this is when we will get the understanding of time and the resources necessary for recovery. I would like to ask, are there any techniques which would allow us to calculate the damage in the left bank, because the flooding is more intense in that area, but our specialists have no access over there. Though techniques that are approved by the Ministry of Environmental Protection, they allow using the data from aerial photography, and we can see the previous condition and current condition, and thus we may evaluate, and maybe even after the occupation of those territories we may have direct access to those places and to add or to re-evaluate what is preliminary calculated now. What are the resources that the Environmental Inspectorate uses over there? Is there any help, any support necessary on the level of the specialist equipment to make sure that the situation is processed in a prompt and professional way? So in fact we don't only engage the representatives of Kherson Regional Inspectorate, but also specialists from other regions. I hope we have enough resources for the time being. On top of that, we work in cooperation with State Emergency Service and other agencies that take samples or accumulate the information which will be generalized for further evaluation and calculation of losses. If there are no more questions on the floor, I want to thank you for your expert answer. Joining us was Dmytro Zaruba, the first deputy head of the State Environmental Inspectorate, and we were talking about the situation in Kakhovka HPP. We will continue our work tomorrow. See you shortly.